Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this episode of our Learning Web Development in 2022 series. So for today's episode, we are going to continue learning about DOM and JavaScript, and we are going to be learning specifically. We're going to be learning about form validation. So we're going to see how we can make custom validation using JavaScript. So let's dive right in. We are going to start from right where we stopped. So here we have our code just where we stopped. So from the last class, we had two fields, two input fields, one to take first name, another to take second name. So we're using JavaScript to actually display those names in an alert when the user clicks submit. So today we are going to see how we are going to write a custom validation for that. So we're going to see how we are going to write custom validation for those fields. So just like I said, let's see those fields in action. So back in our browser, this is a page we built from the last episode. This is a page. So if I type John and Doe here and I hit submit, we'll get an alert that shows this. Well, what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be customizing the function of that form by adding validation. So validation is just a way of making sure whatever the user has entered into the form is correct before you display a message. The current state of our page, actually it's possible for the user to submit an empty form and you just get an alert, which generally is for something serious. That would be a problem. So like if you go back here and if you leave this form empty and you click this, you see you get an alert with empty message. So using validation could actually prevent this type of things from happening. So with that said, let's dive into the code. So here we are back in VS Code, and what we're going to be doing first is we are going to be moving this DOM where we're holding reference to HTML. We're going to move them outside this function to become a global variable so that other functions, multiple functions, can have access to them. So we do that by cutting that code and pasting it back up here. So the next thing we want to do now is to write the code for our validation. So for the validation, we're going to create a new function. I'll say function, and let's call the function validate inputs. So we have a function like this, and that function we are going to within the function we are going to write all the code for our validation. So let's get to that. So first thing we want to validate is the first name. So this field here, we want to validate whether the first name is entered. So what we'll do is we create an if statement. So say if, and so we'll create an if statement. So we'll say if f name input dot value dot trim. We are going to use the trim method to remove white spaces, so that even when the user enters only a white space, we will still our code is able to tell that that input field is empty. So yeah, so we're going to do that. So if this value is equal to an empty string, that means we should get a validation error. And so we're going to create a variable here. We're going to create a Boolean variable here that will track the validation error. So say let has errors, and the default value of this variable will be will be false. So in the beginning, we assume we don't have any error. As we move forward, we'll determine whether we'll have an error or not. So next thing we are going to do now, after checking this condition, we are going to set has errors to be equal to true. Now with this, we've done the validation, but we have one issue at hand, which is we don't have any way of communicating this validation we've done to the user interface, to the front end of our page. So now to do that, let's go back up here. Let's go within head and add some CSS. So we just use the style tag within head to add CSS. So we're going to add we're going to create a class here in our CSS, and we'll say has error. So we're going to create this class, and within the class we are going to set border. I'll say border is going to be 1 pixel solid, and we're going to go for a red border. So the idea is to use this border around any of the input field that has an error. So like so far the code we've written is for the first name input field. So after setting the boolean to has error, we can go further to use DOM again to actually manipulate that element and change the border to has error border class. We're going to add the has error border class to it. So let's do that by doing fname input dot class list. So it has a property like class list. So within class list, there's a method add. So this lets you add a class. So let's add the class which is has error. So add that class there. So confirm that. We can now save our code, and after saving our code, we can move to the browser to verify what we've done so far. Excuse me. So here we are back in the browser. Let's refresh the page and hit submit. So we do not get anything. We must have missed something. So I'll go back to verify that. Okay, so here's what I'm missing. I've not actually made use of the function. We've created a function actually. So we need to call the function. Currently we're not calling the function. So to call the function, we go back here to this method, the submit button. So we're going to replace submit data with validate input. So that's what we're going to have here instead. So what we'll do eventually, we can come down here, and if there is no error, that is when we submit the input. So we can have like another final if statement here that says if has errors equal false, then we can do the submission. So over here we can now call the submit data function. Well, let's go back and verify our work so far. So save and switch back to the browser. Refresh the page, hit submit, and you can see there's a red border around this field, and also the data is not submitted. But if I make an attempt to write something like this and I hit submit, you see the alert pops up because the submission is done. But that also brings another issue. Yeah, this time the data is correct. We have data here, but we still have the red border here. So we need to have a way of removing the red border. So let's go back to VS Code and implement that. So in order to get rid of that bug, we need to have an else statement attached to this. So create an else statement, and within the else statement, we actually remove the has error class. So what we'll do is just like how we added a class, say dot class list dot, then use the remove method and remove the class, which the class is has error. So this will fix that issue. And before we confirm, we can even move forward to do the same thing for the second input field, which is lname dot value. We're going to trim again, and we'll compare that to an empty string. And basically we do the same thing of setting has errors to true, and we add the class. So add the has error class. Then we need the else statement part 2. So yeah, with that we are now doing validation for both input fields, so we can save our code and move back to the browser to confirm what we've done so far. So here we are back in the browser. Refresh the page, try submitting. You see that for the first one there is no error, so yeah, it's not red. The second one is currently red because it's empty. So if we type something there and we hit submit, you see we don't get any validation error, and the submit function is called. That's why we have the alert popping up. So that's just about solves our validation issue. So another last thing we'll do before we go is it is actually a very common use case of validation is email fields. So let's say this is our page, we're taking the users, let's say this a sign up page for a newsletter or something. We're trying to get the person's name and also their email address to so we can send in an email. One issue we are very likely to run into is the issue of the user entering a value that is not really an email. How do you get to filter that out and prevent users from submitting values that are not actually emails? So that's actually a tricky problem. So this type of problem too is a problem that you can actually solve using validation. So we'll take a look at how to do that. So in order to do that, we are going to add a new field to our form. So go back to VS Code and add a new field. So go back to the HTML section, and to save time, I'm just going to copy this last name field, copy and duplicate it, and just change the label to email, and we can change the ID to email. So that about does that. We'll now need to come back to our JavaScript section. We also need to create a new variable that holds a reference to the email input. So we'll create a new variable and so create a new variable, and we're going to call that variable email input. So it's going to be equal to document dot get element by ID, and the ID will be email, the same ID specified in the HTML just now. Now we'll go back here and we need to add an extra condition, but something is quite different with this. In this case, we are not just trying to verify whether the field is empty or not. We want to actually be sure that this field contains email. So that brings us to regular expression, or short form regex. So regular expression is a special trick for actually validating the format of a string or the user input. So we need to create a regular expression, and before this tutorial I've already prepared a regular expression for this. I'm just going to paste that regular expression here for us. So come down here. So this is our regular expression. So this regular expression is going to verify and make sure that the user enters a text, there's @ sign, and there's a domain name. So that's basically what this regular expression means. You can read more about regular expression after this. I will probably link to a documentation page in the description if you want to learn more about regular expression. So we have this regular expression now. So we are now ready to make use of the regular expression to do our validation for the email field. So what we are going to do is we are going to use a test method. So let's get into that. So we're going to say if the regular expression dot test, we're going to test it against the user input. So the user input this time around is the email input dot value. So that's the user input that we're testing this against. So we're going to do this condition, and within that, but actually there's a thing about this condition. This condition would return true if the format is correct, and want to trigger an error when the format is incorrect. So we can just use the exclamation mark to invert the result. So you usually use the exclamation mark to change true to false or false to true. So in case we have a true here, when the format is correct, this if statement will not return true, so it will not execute. But when the format is wrong, it will execute. So at this point, within this if statement, we can now say email input dot class list dot add. Then we can now add our has error class. So add a has error class, and we also need to set the variable has error to true. Then you can also have an else statement to reset the field class by removing the has error method. So we can save and move back to the browser to see our progress so far. So here we are back in the browser. We refresh the page, and now there's an email field. So hitting submit, you can see the email field has that red line. So let's try typing an invalid email. We still get the red border. So let's try adding an email, though not a valid email, but should follow the format of email. And Tara, you can see our validation works. So yeah, the submission is done. So yeah, that's basically what we were discussing for today, and we can come over here and have a look at the code again. So basically, the code validates is triggered when the submit button is clicked, and if the validation has no error, we will go ahead to do the submission. If there was an error, the validation is not done. So yeah, that is basically it for today, and this wraps our learning of JavaScript DOM, like using JavaScript to manipulate HTML documents. There's a whole lot more that you could do, but for the scope of this series, this is where we'll stop with DOM. So in the next episode, we dive into something slightly more deep, and that will be working with HTTP request. So basically, to build a dynamic website, your website might depend on external services. So some of those external services, you need to make HTTP calls to their endpoints to get data or response from them. So yeah, in the next episode, we are going to take a look at that. So thank you for watching. I hope you've learned something, and see you next week. Bye bye.